Hello, hello, and welcome to this live session for the course 19th Century English Novel. Welcome, viewers, and I'm hoping that you are all keeping safe and well. Now, I will begin by looking at the questions which have already come through for me from the students. Now, one of the major questions that are repeatedly asked is what is the format of the end semester exam, the final exam. It's very simple. The final exam has 3 parts. The first 2 parts will be MCQs, which means you will be choosing the best answer from the options given below. There will be multiple choice questions, and there will be true or false questions. And the final section will be paragraph answers or short note answers. A writing prompt will be given to you. In fact, there will be about 10 writing prompts, and you will have to respond to every question. You will have to write up to 250 words responding to that particular question. So your answers will be 1 or 2 paragraphs maximum, and you will be, as I said, responding precisely to the question asked. Usually the students, what they do is just summarize the plot, which is not usually what I'm looking for. So please kind of try to react to the particular issue that has been asked as part of that writing prompt. So I do have a couple of sample questions and answers. I have brought 3 questions and responses to them, which have been put together by a student. I thought I will share with you how an advanced level student also kind of responds to these type of questions. So I will show them to you in a second. So we will begin first with persuasion. I will give you a sample question, and I will also show you on the screen the 2 paragraphs which the student has put together as a response to that particular question. Okay, this is sample question 1. Would you classify Anne's understanding about the position of women in society as liberal? Explain with suitable examples. So the question is, would you agree that Anne Elliot in Persuasion, a novel written by Jane Austen, as holding a position of the liberal? So the question is asking you to explain with suitable examples. Is Anne a liberal woman, a liberal woman in today's understanding? Now this is the answer. The student has come up with 2 paragraphs as a response. I will take you through the first paragraph slowly. In the novel Persuasion, Anne Elliot expresses both liberal and conservative opinions regarding a woman's position. Following the accident of Mary Musgrove's son, Mary creates a ruckus, a fuss. Ruckus means a fuss, a problem. She throws a tantrum about being left at home to take care of her son while the child's father is having a good time at a family dinner. During this occasion, Anne says that taking care of the child is a mother's province. For a reader, this opinion is surprising as it contradicts the portrayal of Anne as a well-read, class-blind, gender-blind as well, and a liberal character. It reminds the reader of Victorian patriarchal sensibilities and their ability to influence the opinions of even well-educated women. However, on a different occasion, Anne portrayed the ability to think beyond the stereotypical characteristics that are attributed to women. In a conversation between Captain Harwell and Anne that occurs in Bath, Harwell talks about the lack of constancy and faithfulness in women's characters and uses literature as proof to justify his opinion. During this occasion, Anne portrays a very nuanced understanding of patriarchy while responding that literature has been written by men for a very long time and women have been deprived of the privilege of education and words for generations. Therefore, it is possible to conclude that Anne Elliot embodies a liberal as well as a Victorian understanding about women's roles. So this is a fairly good response to that question, is Anne Elliot liberal? And if you look closely at these two paragraphs, you can see how very clearly the student has structured her arguments over these two paragraphs. So in the very first line of that first paragraph, she says, let me go back to the first paragraph. She says, in the novel Persuasion, Anne Elliot expresses both liberal and conservative opinions regarding a woman's position. And if you just look at that first statement, you can see that that statement is responding to this question of whether Anne is liberal or not. So the answer is Anne is liberal as well as conservative. And the student gives you points to justify both these perspectives. That's exactly what I want you to do when you respond to short note questions. Try and see if you can respond in a very direct manner to the question, or you can also respond in a very nuanced manner which brings in a lot of perspectives. There's no one right answer. There can be several right answers depending on the way you justify your perspectives by bringing in evidence from the text, from the society in which that text was produced. So let's go back to that question further, and you can see how she has given examples to prove her point. So she takes the example of Mary Musgrove's son who injures himself after falling from a tree, and what are the reactions of the son's mother, Mary, and the reaction of the aunt, Anne Elliot. So that is the first example which is discussed in a detailed way by the student as a response to the conservative side. The conservative side of Anne Elliot. And if you go back to the next paragraph, there's further example being offered by the student to respond to the liberal side in Anne, which is kind of discussed by her in her conversation with Captain Harwell. So when Captain Harwell puts down women and says that they are not very faithful, Anne says, of course we are faithful, but our faithfulness doesn't come through literature, and the main reason for that is all literature have been written by men. So how is it possible for that quality of women, the faithful quality of women, to come through, to surface in literature? So you can see very clearly and very powerfully the student kind of responds adequately to the question. Okay, now I want to pick up on a question which came through earlier, which is, can you give us some examples of the themes that are discussed in the 19th century novel? The 19th century novel deals with a whole array of issues and concepts. So if you want to kind of look at some very well discoursed topics, gender would be one, money, property issues, who's going to get the money at the end of the story is a big concern in 19th century fiction. So if you look at Persuasion, we realize that the house is going to go to Mr. Elliot, the heir to the property, but Mr. Elliot is not going to get the girl, that is Anne Elliot. So there is this money plot, and then there is this romance plot as well. And if you look at A Tale of Two Cities, history becomes the central subject of that novel. How history pans itself out, how the history affects individual lives, the havoc it causes in individual lives. So history slash politics would be another subject in 19th century fiction. And science, the excesses of science, is also a major topic in 19th century novel, a major subject of 19th century novel. And The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde discusses the impact of science on particular lives. So these are some of the major concerns of the novel. Social climbing is also a major concern, how people move up and down the social ladder. So if you climb up the social ladder, it will be social climbing. So that would also be a major concern of 19th century novel. Dickens writes quite a bit on this particular subject. Great Expectations is a fantastic example of social climbing. You can see how Pip, who has been taken under the wing of Miss Havisham, comes into a lot of money when he grows up, and that kind of increases the social importance of Pip. So social climbing is also a major concern of 19th century novel. And Bildungsroman, the growing up, the narrative of growing up, the developmental novel is another term for Bildungsroman, and it captures the ways in which a particular individual grows, into a mature human being. And Dickens again writes. Is very, very interested in this kind of Bildungsroman, the developmental novel, where he is able to very, very spectacularly capture the growth of specific individuals. As I said, Pip, David Copperfield, the autobiographical novel as well is a perfect example of these kinds of thematic issues that Dickens has discussed in his work. Okay, one question that has come through is the stream of consciousness. The stream of consciousness is a technique which is a very, very modernist technique, and Virginia Woolf is supposed to have popularized that technique in her fiction. So I would usually classify that as that technique as coming under the modernist fiction. However, to look at a parallel of that in the 19th century, I would pick up on Jane Austen, where you kind of get a stream of consciousness when you look very closely at Anne Elliot. Anne Elliot's internal monologues are captured brilliantly by Austen through her technique called free indirect discourse. And so the free indirect discourse would be a cousin of that technique of stream of consciousness, where the characters' internal thoughts are captured, in a very, very visceral way by the writer. Okay, I'm looking at other questions which have come through over the chat. How are women characters and women novelists treated by other community in Indian novels during the 19th century? Okay, the purview of this particular course is look at British fiction. So I'm not particularly looking at Indian fiction in the 19th century context. I think that would be the subject for another big course, possibly an NPTEL course on the subject. Now I'm going to look at another question which came earlier, and that was on the genres that are prevalent in the 18th century. As I told you, this is a 19th century course. So if you want me to kind of briefly talk about 18th century genres, we had the rise of the novel, the beginnings of the novel. Daniel Defoe was the progenitor, the pioneer of this kind of genre, the novel genre, which was a very, very emerging novel at that point. And so Defoe's Robinson Crusoe is considered to be the first of the novels. And then we have other genres such as satire. We had satire. Journalism itself was a new genre that came about with Addison and Steele writing essays. So we did have other genres such as the epic and so on. In the 19th century, we had subgenres. Subgenres to the novel, such as Gothic fiction, which was prevalent in the early 19th century, as well as in the 18th century. We had domestic fiction, we had realistic fiction, sensation fiction, Newgate novels, Silver Folk novels. So we had a wide array of novels and their genres with specific modes being written about in that period. Okay, so picture of women in Indian English literature. I think that question will be answered by me in tomorrow's live session, where I'll be doing a session for the modern Indian writing and English translation course. So perhaps we can take this question to that live session, where we can talk about the representation of women in Indian English literature. Okay, the other question which has come through previously. Okay, so I think I have covered relevant questions. How can we increase the qualities of today's novel by studying the 19th century novel, realism and naturalism? Okay, this is a good question. The 19th century novel is a very special kind of novel. It's a product of that period. It's a period which underwent rapid change. So the 19th century plot has unique characteristics. What are some of the unique characteristics? It is very expensive. The 19th century novel is baggy. In fact, the three novels that we studied for this course are shorter compared to the usual fare that comes under the category of 19th century fiction. We have multiple volumes classified as one novel. So there'll be 3-volume novels, big novels. So the canvas, the landscape of the novel is massive. And there are Booker-winning novels which are supposed to sound like 19th century novels. So the other big characteristic, or the other major characteristic of the 19th century novel is that it is heavily plotted. It's very, very neatly plotted. All the loose ends are neatly tied up, usually in a 19th century novel. If you look at Persuasion, it's a well-plotted novel. All characters are explained in terms of their position at the end of the novel. We know where Mrs. Clay is under the protection of Mr. Elliot. So we know what's the status of Elizabeth Elliot. She has no hopes of getting married. So everybody's status is neatly explained. Mrs. Smith, she is enjoying the socializing, enjoying the social circle of Anne Elliot and her husband, Captain Wentworth. So, and likewise with A Tale of Two Cities, it has numerous characters, and again, all these characters have a part to play in the plot. It can be a smaller part, it can be a larger part, but everybody has a role to play in that universe. Everybody is important. Everybody's position is important in a 19th century novel. So these are some of the features of a 19th century novel. And again, as I said, satire is also a major feature. Now, if you look at Vanity Fair, there we have a major we have a major thematic impetus of satire, where the society itself is ridiculed in this kind of novel. Okay, poetic realism, naturalism. So naturalism and realism, these are all the modes which can be looked up as sub-genres of the novel category. realism and naturalism, they try to kind of capture, portray the society as it is. In fact, a photographic realism is what some of the writers used to go for. For example, George Eliot, Middlemarch is supposed to be highly realistic, and even Mrs. Gaskell did a realistic job of portraying Manchester life. So all these are techniques capturing society as much as possible through text, through words. So naturalism and all these poetic realism and realism are more or less overlapping categories, and some of it relates to the world, the domain of painting. Some of it relates to the world of a novel. So the idea, the main impetus, the main intention is to capture society as it is. So naturalism, sometimes if you look at the Flemish paintings, they're supposed to be very, very naturalistic, capturing people as they are going about their work, what does the novelist or the painter intend to communicate by just giving us snapshots of such life is a big question. So the interpretation is what we offer as readers, as interpreters of such work. Okay, Newgate fiction is the other question which is coming through. Newgate fiction are accounts, fictionalized accounts of the narratives of crime, committed by prisoners who were incarcerated, jailed inside Newgate, the prison. So that was a subgenre. As Gothic fiction is a subgenre, sensational fiction is a subgenre, Newgate fiction is also a subgenre of the novel, big novel category. Dickens's Oliver Twist, some would argue, can also be classified as Newgate fiction. It's a very short-lived category, but was very, very popular among the people who kind of consumed a lot of crime narratives which came through in the newspapers as well. So all these crime narratives were offered as cheap, publications for very little money, and people just lapped it up. Okay, I'm looking at other questions coming through. So we have looked at stream of consciousness. I gave you the parallel to that in the free indirect discourse. 19th century women writers, maybe we can talk a little about that in tomorrow's live session on modern Indian writing in translation. And I did talk about the 19th century novel and its impact on contemporary fiction, where some writers of today tried to kind of go for the multiple plot. Multiple plot is also a characteristic of 19th century fiction. We don't have just one big plot, we have several plots. Dickens does the multiple plot very beautifully. In fact, in A Tale of Two Cities, we have the Jerry Cruncher senior junior plot ongoing, which is happening side by side with the French Revolution plot as well. And we talked about poetic realism, a little bit. I'm not going into the other genre of poetry, but novelistic realism, yes, we did talk about it. I would advise you to read the Manchester novels of Mrs. Gaskell. North and South is also fantastic to read, to capture the realism of that period, especially the industrial revolution. The industrial complications are beautifully captured by Mrs. Gaskell. Okay, so naturalism, I think if you want to know more about naturalism, I think it would be a great idea to read the French novels as well. But for now, the subject of study is the British realism, the British novel. Okay, raising voice against male domination in this particular 19th century English novel context. how would you see that? I mean, we get it in different shades. If you look at the particular novel Persuasion that we have read, I have given you an example of how Anne Elliot very, very quietly but powerfully says that, all literature or the majority of literature have been created by men, therefore the voice of women, the character of women doesn't very clearly come through. So that's a very powerful statement made by Anne Elliot in that novel. So you can see how very subtly this raising the voice against male domination, I'm using your own phrase there, to talk about or address this subject. So Austen does things in a very, very subtle, quiet, sophisticated, gentle manner. We don't have any placard holding in Austen's fiction. So whatever reaction the women have against male domination, it's done within the domestic context in a conversational way. So it's very interesting to kind of study the resistance of Austen's heroines. In general, we can kind of classify them as not stepping outside the bounds of society's regulations. Austen's heroines are conservative. They don't endorse any radical steps for the heroine, but at the same time, we find these heroines to be very assertive, very independent, very witty, intelligent. So these characteristics are held up for admiration by the author, by the writer, and these are the characteristics which draw the men towards the good men, the handsome men, the heroes towards these characters. So that's how resistance is done in an indirect way, in a circumtitious way in Austen's fiction. Okay, Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness. It's a novel which condemns the greed, the greed of the white man, the excesses of the white man. So the Heart of Darkness is not in Africa per se. The Heart of Darkness is within the heart of man. So it's a novel which kind of questions the colonial project. It questions the colonial project's mission of saving the unenlightened man. So Heart of Darkness is a classic novel which questions in an universal manner issues of greed, capitalism, and colonization. Okay, what I'm going to do now is to go back to the second example. What are the main themes of 19th century novels which took part in the lives of the 19th century people? Yes, when I began this session, I kind of took you through some of the major themes. The major themes of 19th century fiction is courtship. By courtship, I mean romance. The process of courting one another, romancing one another. Marriage is a big theme. So we have the example of courtship in Austen's Persuasion, how Anne Wentworth and Anne Elliot and Captain Wentworth court one another. So courtship is one big theme. Marriage is also a massive theme. We can look at the examples of marriage in A Tale of Two Cities. There are several marriages in that novel. One is the marriage of Lucy Manette and Charles Darnay, and then we have the marriage of the Defarges, the French marriage, and then we have the marriage of the Crunchers. So we have a marriage as a massive theme of the 19th century novel. So we have Lucy Manette being held up as the ideal. That's the best marriage according to the ideology of the novel, and that marriage is contrasted with both the Defarges marriage and the Crunchers marriage. So the next major theme is, as I said, politics, and politics as French Revolution is discussed at great length, and how politics has an impact on marriage. Industrialization is also a big theme. Mrs. Gaskell's novel talk about that. And then we have science. The impact of science is also a massive theme. What are the effects, the ill effects of science is beautifully rendered in R.L. Stevenson's A Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The scientific experiments seem to split man into two very distinct, contrary personalities. And if you look at many of the novels of the 19th century, science doesn't come off really well in a positive manner. And we might want to think about as to why science doesn't come off very positively in those fiction of the time. So what I'm going to do now is go back to another example, a sample question and an answer, and I'll come back to the questions again. Okay, this is sample question 2. Write a short note on insanity as portrayed in A Tale of Two Cities. Reflect on the reasons that spurred on delirium in the characters in the novel. What influence did the French Revolution have on these circumstances? So what is the question asking you to respond to? The idea of insanity, the subject of insanity, of madness. The word delirium is also used. We have characters in the novel who become delirious, who lose control over their consciousness. So reflect on the reasons. So the question is asking you to speculate, to think about the reasons behind the madness of the character. So respond to these ideas. So we have two paragraphs which discuss the idea of madness. So look at the first statement. Multiple characters in the novel spiraled into delirium in the face of oppression. So several characters have this quality of madness. For example, Dr. Manette loses coherence and becomes restless multiple times in the novel. So he is the ideal representative for the quality of madness. His tryst with madness started during his solitary confinement in the Bastille in France. Even after leaving Bastille, he had episodes of delirium twice. Once after Lucy got married, and another time after Charles Darnay was sentenced to execution. Another character who experienced insanity was Madame Defarge's sister, who had lost all sense of coherence before succumbing to torture. She wailed for her husband, father, and brother and counted till 12 in her delirium. Even Charles Darnay showed signs of initial stages of madness when he started counting his steps while being imprisoned in secret for no fault of his own. So if you look at this first paragraph, there are several examples in terms of the characters who are afflicted with madness, extended madness or brief episodes of madness. So if you, as I pointed out, Dr. Manette is this representative of this quality of insanity because of his long confinement in the Bastille. And then we have an example of Charles Darnay himself being slightly losing control over himself when he has been imprisoned. So he begins to count his steps as he walks back and forth in his prison cell. And then we have Defarge's sister, who becomes hysterical when she is brutally assaulted by the Evremonde brothers, and she counts 12. So the idea of counting numbers as well as counting the paces, the moments, is also kind of symbolic of this idea of madness. And you can look at the next paragraph. All the three characters lost their sanity due to the oppression they were subjected to. While the first two characters were subjected to injustices by the aristocracy, Charles Darnay was treated unfairly and cruelly in revolutionary France by the working class. So it's a very interesting point, it's not just revolutionary France. It's not just the the revolutionary France that has been oppressing the people. The people, even after gaining freedom, even that world, the Republic is also oppressing the innocent. So that example is clearly given in Charles Darnay's case, when this innocent immigrant has been arrested by the Republic and thrown into prison for the crimes committed by his ancestors. So all societies seem to be oppressive in this novel. So even Britain has its oppressive side. Britain, which doesn't go through this revolution, that is also oppressive. I can give you an example. We have Jerry Cruncher oppressing his wife for praying. He calls her aggravator. So it's very bizarre the way he attacks his wife for praying. So all systems have their problems. This shows that the French Revolution did not eradicate oppression but merely turned the tables on the oppressed and the oppressor. Both aristocratic and revolutionary France imprisoned, executed, and tortured innocent people, which pushed them into a state of insanity. So look at the way, the fantastic way in which the final statement kind of draws in different ideas and connects it to the question, the idea of insanity. So this student says that the aristocratic government, the revolutionary government, the republic, all these governments imprison people, execute them, and torture them, and push them to a state of insanity, madness. Okay, so discrimination between literature and illiterate women. So we do have characters, women characters who are illiterate in Jane Austen's fiction. In fact, we don't have a lot of them who are highly well read. So the central characters, the middle class characters, are very well read. They can read novels, they can write letters, but working classes and figures who come from the bottom of the social scale, they don't have the ability to read and write, and somebody has to read letters to them. And if you look at Emma, the novel, Jane Austen's novel Emma, we have the farmer not being able to write perfectly. In fact, his love letter is read by, his love letter to his lady love is read by Emma, and she makes fun of the way in which he has composed that letter. So you can see that difference in social scale between the classes, which is kind of portrayed through the ability to write well, to read well. So accents, different characters have different accents. The way they speak English is differentiated in the novel, and that gives you an indication as to their class position. And again, Emma is a fantastic example. Emma speaks, faultless English. She's a very well-bred, highly educated woman. Her compatriots are maybe not as well-read as Emma. Jane Fairfax, maybe she's well-read because she's a governess and so on, but the other characters not so well-read. So, the class discrimination can be easily gauged through the way in which the characters read and write. So how is the reflection of society in the 19th century novels? Okay, as I said, the previous point about realism ties in with this question of reflection of society. So many of the novels try to kind of reflect society. Some novels refract society. Capturing society as it is becomes one of the ends of 19th century fiction, particularly on the part of writers such as Gaskell and even Dickens. Dickens does capture beautifully the working class accents. Hard Times is a fantastic example. The working class characters come off really brilliantly in terms of the way they dress, speak, and live. So capturing reality is a major intention, and the point is, as I said, when you capture society with all its good and bad sides, and the hidden agenda on the part of Dickens was that such a representation would influence the government to do something for the betterment of these poorer sections, and it did work. Dickens's rendering of Oliver Twist, and the status of those poor orphans in workhouses did shake the conscience of the government, and they did intervene by bringing in reforms to uplift the position of the people in those institutions. Okay, how do Gothic novels portray the female characters? It's a very good question. I mean, Gothic is a major mode. Major mode, by mode I mean a style, a particular narrative which was very, very popular towards the turn of the 18th century and in the beginning of the 19th century. So Gothic is expansive as well, and in fact it's a subject for an entirely new course. The Gothic novel, the popular Gothic novel, can be a new course unto itself. So how does it portray the female characters? The female characters are curious. They're very, very curious. They want to know, but at the same time, the female characters are oppressed as well. Many of them are orphans or motherless. The fathers can be good, or sometimes they can be very oppressive, patriarchal figures. So their life is pretty interesting. Sometimes they are incarcerated in dungeons, castles, and they are rescued by, benevolent patriarchs, or they're rescued by benevolent, heroes. So, as I said, the heroines are really interesting figures, and there are two different kinds of ways in which the supernatural in the Gothic is explained. Sometimes the supernatural is real. There are some supernatural incidents which are affirmed as well at the end of the novel, and in some cases the supernatural is explained in a very rational manner. It's explained away. So these are the two ways, and Radcliffe is one of the major practitioners of Gothic fiction. Okay, please explain the writing of female novelists during the 19th century. Again, I like this question very much. If you compare the writing of Dickens with, say, Jane Austen, you will see how it differs. You sometimes feel as if Austen's writing is light, not in the sense that it is superficial, but in the sense that it is confined to a particular domain, a particular world. It's a small world. That world might be contained within a domestic space. It could be confined within a parlor, within a living hall. So it's confined in that manner, and it's very light in the sense that there are play of words, there is irony, there is wit, and the concerns are limited to particular aspects, romance, betrayals, and broken friendships and broken engagements, and so on and so forth. But if you compare Dickens, here's got plenty, you would think, in terms of the concerns that the novelist deals with. Dickens is all-encompassing in the sense that he brings in the universe into his fiction. He's a London man, and London becomes representative of that world at that point of time. So his concerns are multiple, numerous, manifold, and you get a chimney sweeper, crossing sweeper, you get lawyers, you get grandees, you get all sorts of people, and you have the entire cross-section of society somehow represented in those big novels. For example, Bleak House. So and the style also is very grand in the sense that sentences can be extremely long, and there are also caricatures, comic figures, and Dickens kind of changes his style to suit the characters. So you have very dramatic figures, and the language matching the characters as well. Okay, what is the best novel in the 19th century and why? There are several best novels in the 19th century in my estimation. Vanity Fair is extremely good, because the entire society is ridiculed. The entire society is held up for mockery. It's vanity, it's corruption, it's vice, it's greed. Everything is portrayed back to the reader on the pages of the novel Vanity Fair. George Eliot's Middlemarch is also a fantastic novel, but it's massive in size. It's massive in size in the sense that it's literally very big, and you have again multiple plots. Again, the entire cross section of the society is being represented, and she's kind of sometimes called as the female Dickens. The female Dickens, in the sense that she captures every major reform movement, the major scientific advances, and she has doctors, advocates, again priests, and so she kind of competes with Dickens in that sense. So I would love to read, in fact teach Middlemarch as part of a separate course, as a course unto itself as well. Yes, the marginal section is also captured in the 19th century novel. In every novel, we have marginal figures. We have Mrs. Smith, who's a marginal figure in Austen's Persuasion. She's a widow, and she is sickly. So we have physical impairment also represented in the novel. The disability, it's an interesting topic. The disabled people are also represented in the novel, and we have a tale of two cities representing the marginal figures as well. We have spies, S-P-I-E, spies, figures who spy on one another, being represented. John Barsad is a marginal character in that regard, even though he plays interesting and important roles. We have marginal figures in the persona of the Cruncher, the senior and the junior. So they represent the figures who are in the fringes of society, not very wealthy. They kind of scrape their living by doing odd jobs. That's what Jerry Cruncher does for Mr. Lorry. He sits outside in the open, outside the bank, for the benefit of the bank, for the benefit of Mr. Lorry. So he's an errand boy, and he passes that job to his son as well at the end of the novel. So we do get marginal people represented. So if you look at the novella by R.L. Stevenson, The Strange Case, we have marginal figures in the persona of the housekeeper of Mr. Hyde. It's very interesting representation. And we have the steward of Dr. Jekyll. So the male steward, he is very good. He's represented as respectable, very sympathetic, very loyal. But if you look at that housekeeper of Hyde, she resembles the master in the sense that she is also portrayed as evil. So the idea that the very marginal are also problematic in terms of their identity is kind of pointed through such representation of marginal figures. So it's an interesting character that we need to look at. Just a very quick word on the portrait of the artist as a young man. I think it's also part of that area of or the subgenre of the Bildungsroman, where the growing up is captured, the growth of an individual into a mature being is captured very, very powerfully by Joyce. Now I'm going to move to the final sample question that I have with me for today. That sample is from this last novel, Jekyll and Hyde. I think that will kind of give you a sense of what to write in terms of that particular novel about ideas of degeneration. How are Victorian fears of degeneration portrayed in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? How are Victorian fears of degeneration portrayed in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? So that's the question, and here is the answer. So we again have two paragraphs, and the student writes that the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde shatters the facade of middle-class respectability through the character of Henry Jekyll. So the middle-class respectability is broken, shattered in this novel, because we find out that Jekyll is not what he seems to be. Following Darwin's theory of evolution, the Victorians feared the onset of devolution, going back in time. Devolution is going back, a state of social, cultural, and racial degeneration. These possibilities of degeneration were exhibited through the character of the respectable Dr. Jekyll. This degeneration was believed to be caused by a variety of reasons, including changing cultural values and the scientific revolution that reduced the power of the aristocracy and gave more social standing to the professional classes and the working classes. So it's very interesting that the student kind of points to several factors which led to this beginning of the degeneration. So if you look very closely, she says changing cultural values, the importance given to certain cultural values have changed in that period. So that is also bringing in degeneracy. The scientific revolution itself is bringing in degeneracy. If you look at the novel, if you think back to the novel, Dr. Jekyll is a scientific man. He does some experiments and is able to kind of change himself into a different human being. So you can see what kind of impact that scientific experiment has on his own body. So all these factors take human beings back in time to a primitive stage where bestiality was enjoyed. Being cruel was a state of joy. So that's what Hyde enjoys in this novel. So and very interestingly, she also points out that the importance given to the professional classes such as doctors, advocates, and the working classes as well have also caused the beginnings of such degeneracy. So these are some of the arguments that she brings up. And she also explains further, saying that Dr. Jekyll is an example of the professional class's respectability. He represents that, as well as a pioneer of Britain's scientific revolution. Jekyll comes to embody this, but the scientific revolution is not bringing good to the society, its morality, and its safety. Dr. Jekyll uses scientific methods to create another version of himself, to exercise his degenerate instincts that are immoral and evil. And we know from the novel that Mr. Hyde attacks a girl, attacks an elderly gentleman, and so on. So we do have very, very strong examples of the degeneracy of Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde, a form of distilled evil, is also distinguished by his ape-like appearance, which repulsed all who came in contact with him. His appearance, primitive instincts, and a lack of civilization and self-control portrays the fear of degeneration into the bygone days. So this is a very good paragraph in the sense that she also captures or refers to the physical representation of Mr. Hyde and connects it with the issue of idea of degeneracy. So if you're physically unpalatable, if you're physically horrifying looking, it means that you are primitive. You have you have evolved into something that doesn't belong to this time and age, but to the bygone days. So these are some of the ways in which you can respond to specific questions in the short note part of your end semester final exam paper. And my request to you is, please respond to the question. Do not just summarize the plot. That will not give you very high marks. Responding particularly to the question that's been asked will improve your chances of getting very high marks, provided that you also express your ideas neatly and clearly, stage by stage, with one or two examples. And you should have a fairly good command over the language. Language issues will bring down the points, the marks that I offer you. Okay, so once again, Okay, two more questions have come through. How can we compare the portrayal of female characters in 19th? Okay, these are big questions. I'll try to do justice in the limited time that I have. Female characters in the 19th century. I mean, the 19th century again is a big period. So you have representations of women in the early 19th century. We have Austen, then we have the Bronte sisters. So we have, a sort of young women coming through. And then we have turn of the century, new women, very powerful, demanding their independence, demanding their share in the workplace, and so on. So you can see an evolution of the representation of women characters. And the 20th century, you do have varied representations of women characters. Some were assertive, some are not so. So it's not a very even representation. That's what I would argue. We have characters that go back in time, very conservative, and then we have characters who are somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. Some are conservative in some respects, liberal in others. And as I pointed out earlier to Austen's Eliot, she kind of combines both sensibilities, the liberal sensibilities as well as the conservative sensibilities. So I would argue that there is no neat break. You cannot kind of neatly compartmentalize and say, okay, 19th century women, very conservative, 20th century, very, very liberal. I mean, you do have examples of either category and every shade in between them. I mean, that's all I can say for now in this limited period of time left. And there's one other question. What are the features of 19th century novels? Please review. Okay, I have been talking about the features of the 19th century novels. As I said, they are very big. Big in the sense that they are baggy, big novels, multi-volume novels. One novel being written across 2 or 3 volumes, which would mean that the plotting is massive. Big multi-plot novels, several characters, and concerns of these novels are plenty. There's marriage, there is romance. Romance first, marriage, then issues of property, who's going to get money from where, for example, Great Expectations, where is Pip getting the money from? Is he getting it from Miss Havisham, the very respectable upper middle class Miss Havisham, or is he going to get it from Magwitch, the convict? In fact, he gets it from Magwitch, and all those things. And then again, the idea of industrial unrest, what is the havoc that industrialization has on the society? Is it for the benefit of society at large, or is it for the detrimental effects of the society at large? And then, as I said, science and its impact as well. What are scientific gentlemen doing, and are they kind of benefiting the society? Are all scientists like Dr. Henry Jekyll, or or all scientists like Mr. Hyde? So these are some of the issues that kind of inform the big 19th century novel. So 19th century novel is a very interesting area. It has a lot of interesting novels. I would advise you to read. The Brontes as well, whom we haven't talked about at length. Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, Anne Bronte. Do read all these novels, and Gothic is also a very interesting subtopic. Okay, yes, Maud Flanders, the female heroine, yes, does lay the foundation for 19th century novels. Yes, the very assertive, trickster kind of heroine is also picked up on by Gothic fiction in some respects. Again, it's a very good question, but we don't have plenty of time to go into detail about that. But the quick answer to your question is yes, Maud Flanders does have a massive impact on 19th century fiction. I can immediately think of Vanity Fair by Thackeray, where the central character is again very, very resourceful, just like Maud. Is it a good idea to include novels? The final question that I'm going to respond to is this one. Is it a good idea to include novels as chapters for kids, like The Tale of Two Cities? Yes, I would think so. It is a good idea to kind of introduce certain chapters to kids. I think Dickens's Christmas Carol might also work because it's also very universal and moralistic, and kids might like the idea of ghosts coming back to say that if you do things like this, you will end up like this. So it's a very interesting cautionary tale, Christmas Carol. And other novels from the 19th century. Of course, you have to make sure that it's age sensitive for the kids. We don't want to scare them or kind of give them material which is not appropriate. So yes, but the general answer is yes, in an abridged manner, or certain chapters might be very, very interesting to the kids. Okay, I would like to thank each and every participant to this live session. Since I had too many questions coming through, I might not have addressed some questions in great detail. But if you want, we can take this over to the email. Do write to me at divya@iitm.ac.in, Divya, Divya @iitm.ac.in, and then I can also continue this conversation there by email. So for now, I hope I have kind of provoked your curiosity to read more of 19th century fiction. Stay safe, keep well. Thank you for watching.